Welcome to the Introduction to Android Database tutorial. We're going to be using SQLite and Java for this tutorial. And so some basic introduction to SQLite scripts to create databases. But mainly most of our programming is going to be in Java just to kind of get us set up. The way this tutorial is set up is I'm going to walk you through a tutorial. Most of the code though is going to be copy and pasted in as we go along. Just to save us time. If you need at times, if you're following along this tutorial, you may have to pause the video to get the code in. Some other things that we're going to cover along the way, basic concepts with persistent storage, CRUD principle, create, read, update, and delete. We'll be implementing that. And we're also going to focus on the MVC pattern, model view controller. And you're going to see that the first part of the tutorial, we're going to very much focus on our database helper file. Which is going to set up our database and database creation. Then we're going to move on to working on the UI in the view, and then lastly we're going to connect it with the controller. So that's how we're going to approach this. Like I said, for simplicity and for speed, I'm going to be, rather than me typing in code as we go, I'll be kind of pasting in sections of code, so that should speed things up. So let's get started. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to start a new Android Studio project, maybe practice database or something would be a good name for this project. I'm going to click next. Everything phone and tablet, that looks good here. Next. Blank activity is what we want to create this with. Maybe even an empty activity might even be better. Let's click next. We can call this main activity, and then we're just going to really quickly hit finish here. Okay, and let that set up. I'm just going to pause the video while it does that. Okay, now that Gradle's finished, we can see that we kind of have our main activity. If we want to scroll down and try and find where that is, we're going to go into the Java folder in the hierarchy here. Inside that first folder, we can see we have a main activity here. We're going to just click on that folder. Now, I have the right-click option enabled in my Mac, so I'm going to right-click on here. I'm going to go New, and I want a Java class. I'm just going to call this class Database Helper. I'm not going to fill any of that in right now. I'm just going to do that manually. Okay, and so we have a database helper class here. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to extend this class. We're going to extend this class. And the class that we want to extend that helps with SQLite databases is SQLite Open Helper. So I can just click on that. Okay, and we can see we have some error there. And that's because it's going to require, if I can get this to help me out here, notice that it needs to implement some methods. So let's just do that right now. And it needs to implement at least an onCreate and an onUpgrade method. So we're going to allow it to do that. We're going to insert those there. Okay. Now, the next thing that I need to kind of make this work is I actually need a constructor class. And so, like I said, for speed and simplicity, I'm just going to stick that in here now. Make that happen. You can see anytime you kind of see this happen where it needs an import, you can just hold down Option and then Return, and then that's going to do that. You can see that my constructor is kind of missing some components. Because it is a copy and paste, I'm missing my variables, and so I'll talk about what these variables are as I go. I'm just going to put in my required variables for my database and then just explain those. So I'm just going to paste these in. Okay, so the first set of variables that you kind of see here is you can see that I have a database name. Okay, and I'm just going to pretend this is maybe our robotics team or something like that. So my database is going to store, I just put as team, and then I have a table name, which is going to be my databases in my database there. I'm just going to call that team data. And then I have 4 fields inside my table. First one I'm just going to call column 0 ID. Second one is we're going to be able to enter a name, email, and phone number. This first column ID is just going to be an auto increment, so it's going to autofill itself, so we have a unique identifier on the primary key in our database. Okay, so as we kind of move down, we have a constructor. And then we have those required methods, and we can see we're kind of getting a little bit of an error method or message there. So I'm just going to copy in those overrides, and then we'll talk about how I have those set up. Sorry for the delay here. I think I might have that constructor copied out a little bit funny there. Let's just go like this. Okay, so we have the onCreate. I'm missing my constructor, it looks like. Let's do this in here as well. Okay, so obviously the top of my code here, like I said, I have the variables. Then I have a constructor, okay, which I've kind of overrode a bit. Notice here that I have the context, which is the argument that my constructor is taking. My database name is going to refer to up here, this team database. We're going to use the factory, leave the factory as null, and version as _1 for right now. Okay, as I kind of move down, I have 2 required methods that I need inside of here. My onCreate, okay, and this is where we get into a bit of an SQL string. Now, I've kind of put this on 2 lines just so that we can see everything within our screen here. But basically, this is just a query string that we're kind of concatenating together. So we have create table, table name referring to up here my table name, team data, plus we have kind of an open brackets, column number 1. Notice it's integer value, primary key auto increment, so it's going to increment on its own. And then column 1 is a text column, which would be storing our name. Column 2 is a text column, which is going to store an email. And column 3 is going to be an integer that's going to store a phone number. Okay, and so we can see what that onCreate is doing. And so this, if you don't want to know more about SQLite kind of queries, you can see that what we're using is, we're referring to that database, okay, which is then we're taking in here, and then we're executing SQL to do that. Now, we're not going to deal with an upgrade option here, so you can just kind of, I'm just not going to talk about this a whole bunch, but you can see we have kind of an option here for upgrading our database. This is what we're going to run. Okay, just a little bit outside of the scope of what we're trying to do within this tutorial. So if we refer back quickly to our Word document, you can see that the first thing that we want to implement within our database is a create method, right? We need to be able to create new entries in our database. And so if I go inside of here, I'm just once again, just for speed, I'm going to paste in my create method that I created earlier. And then we'll take a closer look at it. Okay, so it's just some cleaning up, some imports that we need, obviously, as I kind of get into my create method, first of all. I can see here, if I click here, once again, option enter is going to add those imports that I need. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do inside of our create method, okay, is we need to create a writable database. And you can see this, SQLite database DB, this get writable database. We're going to do that in most of our methods kind of moving forward. Okay, then we're going to create a variable here, content values. And then inside that content values, we're going to put in our kind of 3 columns, okay, that are not auto increment. You can see that first column, that ID, it's going to do on its own. Okay, and then from here, we're going to create a long value, database insert. Okay, you can see our table name. Okay, this is going to take null, and then we're going to insert our content values. Okay, so you can see that there. Now, what we can see with this as being a long is that if the result is less than -1, we're going to return false. Otherwise, we're going to return true. Okay, and so that's all there is really to our kind of create method. So anytime we want to create a method, we're going to call this from in our controller, and we're going to be able to create a new entry into our database. Okay, the next part, if we kind of take a look at our Word document, the next thing that we're going to you need to do with every database is we need to be able to read the data. So we need to enter data, and then we need to be able to read data in our database. So I'm going to quickly just copy in my read method. And let's take a closer look at that. Okay, So notice that our read method returns a cursor, okay, whereas our create method returned a Boolean, okay. And so once again, I need to add that import. Create a writable database, initialize that, okay. And then we're going to do another query here, but it's going to be directed towards a cursor. Database raw query, okay, and then this is just an SQL script. Select from, or select all, star means all, from table. Okay, so this is going to get us everything that's inside of our table. Okay, and then we're going to return that cursor. Okay, that has all the data. The star symbol in SQL is all, so that's going to get us everything. Okay, so that's how we're going to return that, and we'll call that within our controller if we want to get all the contents of our table. Okay, looking at our Word document, moving on. Okay, the next thing that we need to be able to do with our database is update it. Okay, so if we want to replace an entry, we need to be able to update. So the update method that I created earlier on looks just like this. Okay, once again, okay, initializing writable database. Okay, content values again. Okay, and then we're going to now, if you look, it looks very similar to the insert. Okay, except this time when we want to update, we're going to have to overwrite that primary key in order to update our database. So you can see that there. Column number 1, if you looked back at the top here, column number 1 is the ID. So column 0, we're right there. And then it should look very similar to our insert. Okay, database update this time, calling that method. And that takes in, it looks like 3 arguments there. 2, 3, 4 arguments. Okay. And then how are we going to find that? This where clause here, okay, is going to query for our ID. Okay, so we're going to identify by our ID. And you're going to see how we kind of do that when we get to the view in the next kind of tutorial. Okay, and so then that's just going to get that string array ID. Okay, it's good. It's once again a Boolean, so this one's going to return true if it works. And then our last method that we kind of got to add in, the last thing that we're going to need to be able to do to our database is obviously delete entries too. So using that basic CRUD principle, the last thing we're going to be able to need to do is delete. And so this last method here that we're going to add in is delete. You can see it's of the type integer, so it's going to return an integer. Takes in a string ID, which makes kind of sense. If we want to delete, we're going to delete by the ID number. Okay, so we'll be able to search by the ID and delete there. Again, we're going to get a writable database in here, and this is going to return an integer value, taking in 3 arguments. And once again, searching just like we did with the update. Okay, with ID equal question mark, and then that string value. Okay, and so that's going to be all that there is to our model. Okay, very straightforward. We have variables, just to review. We have a constructor. Okay, takes into context, database name, factory can remain null, version 1. The other required method is that we have is the onUpgrade, which is not super important to us at this stage. Okay, and then we have our database kind of creation, creating our 4 columns. Our primary key is column 0. Okay, and then we go through just pretty straightforward: to create, read, update, and delete methods that we're going to call from the controller later on. Next step of this tutorial is going to be making the view. And so making this, what is the user going to actually see? That's the next step. Okay, so we've basically implemented the model. We know that we have a database that we're trying to create that's going to store the name, the email address, and the phone number of people that we're collecting in our database. It's also going to have an ID that is the primary key that's going to auto increment. So now we're on to the next step. So now we're going to start working with the UI. And you can see that in Android, we work with the UI and XML files. And we're just going to work within the GUI of Android Studio to kind of build a basic kind of user interface where we can enter data. So we're on to this next, working on the view. Okay, so just kind of switching away from our two kind of Java files. Now we're going to go into the resources. And we're going to go into layout and just take a look at our kind of main activity there. Okay, and so we kind of have our basic main activity. You can see that there's by default this kind of label here that it just says hello world. We can use that and just expand that a fair bit. So this is actually where we're going to display our data. And so I'm just going to call this label, give it an ID of label results. And then I'm just going to change that to, what did we say? Results. I guess it would be display data or something like that would maybe be more appropriate. And then you can see we can kind of resize this. I'm actually working here. I'm going to move this around. I'm going to not spend a lot of time on putting that in position right now because I'm actually, the rest of my UI elements, I'm going to start kind of top down and create those. So the first thing that I'm going to take in from the user, since the ID is going to be auto-generated, the first thing that the user needs to enter in would be their name. So let's just kind of put an edit text in there, plain text, and so I can just drag this into here and kind of place that there. Now, I want to resize this. I think that's just a little bit on the big side. I want to fit as many UI items as I can in a reasonable place there. So I have the name there that I can enter in. And now you can see in the GUI here that where I want to probably lock this in now, you're probably going to want to do more advanced configuration when you actually do your application. But just for simplicity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this here to be, I guess, 16 from the top. And then I'm going to lock it to this left side as well. I'm going to leave these two open for now. What I'm going to do call this is I'm just going to call this text and text name. That's good enough. I want to add in another. Next thing would be my email, and so I'm just going to grab one here. This looks like this is going to work just fine. Drag that in. Looks a little bit on the big side once again. Move it around a little bit. Shrink that down. Maybe in a different tutorial, I maybe want to expand that. And so I have here. I have that in here. I'm just going to call this text email as its ID. And you can see input type is an email address. I actually want to put a hint in here. Call this email, just so that that shows up when my user opens the app. So they know that's what they need to enter there. So I can leave that there. Click out of this, and then it should show that. And actually, I want to go back to that name one. And I don't want the text to say name, but I want the hint to say name. And then I won't have to delete that name when they add that in, but still give them enough info of what that is. So we have text name is the name of one item, the ID of one item, and then text email is the name of the next one. Next thing I want to enter in here is I want to enter in a phone number. So I can see that they have an edit text that's made just for phone numbers. So once again, I'm just going to bring that in here. I'm going to resize that again. I don't know if I meant to do that. I'm not going to shoot for perfection with this. Just going to try and rough this in. Maybe call this, again, text, phone, good enough, hint, we want a phone, hint, phone, seems like that's good enough. Now, how do I want to align these UI-wise? Like again, I'm going to be pretty simple here. For this one here, I'm just going to click on the email, I want that locked to the top and to the right side. This one here, I want that to the top and the thing above it and left side. And then I need one more text edit box that I'm going to enter in here, and that is just going to be your ID. So I'm just going to say plain text. Actually, you know what, a number would be better. We have number there, perfect. So I'm just going to grab number, drag that in. I don't know which way I should drag it. Let's figure out what I want to do there. I can go here, resize this again. And with this one, I guess I'm just going to call it text ID. I don't know what I did. In my code, if I call it ID or ID, I'll just leave that as that. Click here to set lock that to the one above it and then to the side. Just moving from the top down basically. As I'm going to work it through this, and now I'm going to add in 4 buttons, okay, that just kind of match what we're trying to do. Create, read, update, and delete, which is just going to match our model. So from here, I need to go up to button, grab a button, drag that into my UI. Okay, first button, same thing. I'm going to kind of log it to the top, to the side, and we're going to go button. And the first one is called create. Makes sense. Button create. And I should have that called create for creating new entries. I'm going to add another button. Go up here, drag in another button, and hopefully that goes in there. This button we're going to call button read. Change its text to read. And once again, this time I want to lock it to the left and to the top. And that looks okay. Click somewhere out of there. Okay, that looks not too bad. Next button that I want to drag on here is going to be, so you know what, I'm going to put this one on the side first. Actually, you know what, put this one in here and then I'll. So create, read, update, this one should be called button update. Change its name to update. And that should be okay. Click off of that. Looks good to me. I'm gonna set its where it is in the layout here in a second. Another last kind of thing that we need to be able to do is we need to be able to delete. So I'm just gonna call this button delete. And go down here, change its text to delete. And this one again, I'm going to go top, side. Yeah, maybe I'm going to see if I can resize this a little bit. It's a little bit on the thick side, in my opinion. Just try and make this kind of so it fits. Update as well, a little bit on the thick side. It's not going to be perfect for this, so we could fine tune that later on. With the update, we also wanted to go to the top. We wanted to go there. And then this last, now I want to work with the results here. And this, I think I wanted to lock it just to the top. Where's this going to link it to? There, not here. Let's just delete that, delete that, delete that. That's how I want this to be. Oh, let's mix this up. Spread that out. You don't need 46, I don't think either. Give me the little angle bracket there. Yeah. Not sure if I like the way this is going. Let's go 0, 0 there. I don't like that 44, so I'm just going to go down to maybe 8, so my results are a little higher there. I think that that's going to be okay for our UI. One last thing, I want to put a hint inside this one. This ID field, what we're actually going to use it for is we're going to say ID for update / delete. See if that can fit in there. ID for update and delete. Because we're only going to enter in an ID number because it's going to auto increment as the primary key. We're going to only enter in an ID number in here when we either want to update or we want to delete a field. So this basic UI, the way this is going to work, the way we're going to set this up, is you can enter in the name, email, and phone number. Hit create, should create. Okay. If we want to read all the members of our database, we just can click read, and those should show up in the results here. If I want to update or delete one of my entries, okay, I can enter it by ID number 1. Okay, I can hit delete or update, sorry, to overwrite, and delete to get rid of that. Okay, so that's the way our UI is going to be set up. So now that that's kind of clear what we're trying to do there, and you can see that should correspond directly with what we were trying to do inside our database helper. Okay, we had create, read, update, delete. So that's all in place now. Now we're going to have to start linking things up. So now we're going to go inside of our main activity. Okay, and then the first thing that we're going to need to look at doing is we're going to have to create an instance, okay, of our database helper that we created. Okay, so that's going to be the first thing that we're going to do. So inside, okay, my main activity, after these curly brackets here, let's just kind of put a little separation in between our onCreate method and where our class opens up. The first thing that I need to put in is I need to put in an instance of kind of the database helper. Okay, and so you can see database helper, my database, and so database helper was the name of our class. So now we have access to those methods from inside that database helper. Okay, the next thing that we're going to enter in is we need to initialize all of our different text fields and buttons and all our UI objects. So the two things that we have to do that. First of all, we need to call them here. Once again, we have that we need to import some things there. And so if I go option, return, it should give me the option to import that edit text class. Once again here, option, return, import class. Okay, and then the text view, same kind of thing. Option, return. Okay, and so these, notice that I have the exact same names as what I used in my activity main right here. Okay, the same names that I used as the ID. The one I wanted to check on was the ID. How did I name that? Inside that main activity. Yeah, text ID, everything looks good here. Okay, now we need to link those things, these here, to our actual UI objects. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to do that inside this onCreate method. Okay, so right after, you can see it's going to be a similar way that main activity is linked here in setting the context. So what I'm going to do next is link UI objects. Just a second here. Done this before. Like I said, just to save watching me type. So a link created objects to the UI objects. So if you've created Android applications before, you've done that as well. For each of these UI items that I've initialized up here, okay, I need to link those, okay, to their ID. So text name, I've named them all the same names, and so our UI objects are all kind of initialized there. Okay, so that is kind of basically all we really need to do in this section of the tutorial. So basically all we've done is created a UI in XML. Okay, we can check to make sure that that is working. All these items are linked, but right now it does nothing. So let's just test to see that my application is running. So I'm just going to go up to with inside. I'm going to go run. I'm going to run my application. Yeah, I want to deploy to there. Let's see what we get. So now that the emulator is running, you can see we have everything that we need. We have a name, email, phone number. You can enter in an ID if we want to update or delete. Everything's good. Right now though, I can click on buttons all I want. Nothing is kind of wired up and working. UI is created and we have kind of that model in behind. But now the next thing that we need to move on to is the controller. Okay, we're moving into the final stretch of the tutorial here. We've created the model, which is our database helper. We've now created the view. And the last thing that we're going to create is kind of adding to that main activity. We're going to add some logic in there that kind of links those two things up and allows us to interact with those UI objects in the controller. So let's get right to it. First of all, let's just kind of review, and this is kind of what our UI looks like. So we have name, email, ID, 4 buttons, and an area to display our results. So we need to make that happen. So just going back here, the first thing, obviously we're going to need a method that kind of handles creation and kind of links to that kind of create button. So let's get right into that. Going into the code, now we want to kind of go in below that create method. We're going to add some more things in here and implement these methods in here, but let's first of all add in our create method that I created ahead of time just to save us some time. So let's get right into our method. So if I paste these in, you can see there, once again, I need to kind of add those imports that are missing. Option enter should do that. Import the class. Looks like that's good. We have a toast value here that I'm just going to help display how things go. Once again, option enter should add that toast import for me, hopefully. So that's in place here. So let's just take a look at what the onCreate kind of method does and maybe quickly deploy that and see how that runs. So we have our create method. Be careful with this. Maybe create was maybe a bad thing to use considering I have onCreate up here, but create was just going to be create entries for us. Just going inside that, we kind of have a handler for the button click. You can see it's pretty standard Android stuff. Button create, set on click listener. And then we have the on click there. Now inside of there is kind of meat and bones of this. So we can notice that our insert data, if we look back at our database helper, we could see that that returned a Boolean. And so that's why we have this kind of set up the way it is in our main activity. So we created a new Boolean variable, is inserted, and that equals that insert data. And it takes in 3 arguments. Okay, and so we notice that it takes in name, text box name, get text to convert that to a string, get the text box email text, convert it to a string, and then text box phone number and convert it to a string, and then that should run that insert data. Okay, and then if that inserts properly, that's going to return true, and so we can have a little toast there that says data inserted. Hopefully you're familiar with toast in Android. Just an easy way to show a little bit of quick data on our screen. And toast, make test insert data failed if this returns false and does not work properly. So I'm just going to pause this while I fire up the emulator. Let's just see if this works. So I'm just going to run this, run my app. Okay, and I'm just going to pause while that loads. Okay, so the emulator is running now. I'm just going to enter in a name inside my emulator, Bob. Bob has a really short email, Bob at s.com. Phone number is a very short number, 123, and we shouldn't have to enter anything in the update, and I should just be able to hit create. I should see a little toast happen there that created. I didn't see the toast, did you? Oh, I forgot to implement my method. So one last thing that I forgot to create, I'll just show you what that mistake was. I actually need to run my create method inside here. And so I need to initialize that inside the onCreate. So create, and now that should run. It's set up the listener, everything should be good. We have this kind of neat little button. You can click the little lightning bolt and that should redeploy that for me. I'll just pause it while it loads up. You can see I got this little message that it has deployed. Now when I hit create, hopefully we get some results. But data inserted. So that looks like it's working. We don't know how to read it yet, so that's kind of the next step that we're going to go into. So I'm going to grab my read method, once again that I created ahead of time. Go through what's happening in that. Once again, it's going to be very similar to our onCreate method in that it's going to have an onClick listener. You can see, again, I have a few imports because this is of the type cursor, is get all data, and so I need to make sure that I deal with that by holding down option return. That's going to import the class that I want. Okay, everything else should be kind of caught up now. Once again, button read, onClick listener, onClick, get all data. Okay, so it's going to go back and run our get all data method from our database helper. Okay, get all data right there. Very small little method here. It's of the type cursor, so that's what it's going to return. And you can see if get count equals 0, so it's nothing. Okay, no data. It's going to say there's no data there. Otherwise, okay, it's going to read through. You can see it makes of that type cursor and then while, a while loop here, move to next, reads the ID, get string, and it just adds to that. Notice we have a new line here at the end, so each individual entry is going to be on a new line. It's going to be ID, followed by what the ID is, name, followed by what the name is, email, followed by the email. Okay, and then it's going to add that all to this buffer. Okay, and you can see here, then we're going to display that label results, set text. We're going to turn that buffer that we declared inside here to a string, and we're just going to display it in that big label there, is what should be happening. Okay, so fairly straightforward. So again, let's just deploy to the emulator. Let's go save all. Deploy quickly with this button here. Okay, just pause as that deploys. Okay, so the emulator's back up and running. And now I should be able to hit the read button. Oh, I forgot to implement it again. Once again, forgot to implement the read method in the onCreate. So in here, I want to type in read so that actually works. File, save all, hit the little lightning bolt. Okay, I can add my changes to the emulator, pull up the emulator. Okay. Get that little green box that says we should be good to go. Hit the read button. Okay, and I can see ID equals 1, name equals Bob, email is bob@s.com, and phone 123. Okay, so that looks like it's working. I can add another name here. Sam, email is s@t.com, and phone number 3456, and I'm just going to hit create. Okay, data inserted, little toast here. Hit the read button again, and now I have 2 entries in my database. You can see there, I have Sam and Bob. Okay, on to the next method that I need to implement. Okay, so we have create, read, and now let's move into our update. So just grabbing my update method here really quick. Okay, so going through the update method, once again we have the button update set on click listener, on click, and then inside of there we get kind of the meat and bones of what's going on. If we look back at update data method from inside our database helper, we could see that is a Boolean type of type Boolean. And so inside update data is of type Boolean. You can see that that's going to take in a bunch of values, actually 4 for sure, right? It's going to need the ID, name, and email in order to overwrite that. Okay, you can see queries by the ID, which we're going to have to enter in, and that should return a Boolean if it's successful. So let's take a look at that main method, okay, and see how this works. I'm going to get the text ID, get text, text name, email, and phone number, just like I talked about in the model there. If it is updated, okay, we're going to show a little toast that says update. If it's unsuccessful, update failed. And once again, I gotta remember to implement my method in the onCreate. This time around, I'm just going to copy and move on up. Have that right underneath. Control V, put a semicolon there. Okay, so I create, read, update. Let's just see if this works. File, save all, the little lightning bolt. Apply changes, you can see that's working for me. Let's go in here. Okay, load up. I think we're gonna load up. Okay, so if I wanna update maybe Bob's name, to Big Bob. Let's change his email now to bb@s.com. His phone number now is 2345. Okay, so if I originally just first read the data, so originally I had Bob, different email address, different phone number. Now if I put in Bob's ID number, number 1, I hit update. It should say updated as a toast. Now if I read my data, again, okay, now Bob's email has been updated. Perfect. Okay, last thing that we need to move on to is our delete, which we're going to also use that kind of ID field to kind of access the ones that we want to delete by ID. So moving on down, my last method is delete. Just going to grab that. Said I created all this stuff ahead of time just to save me typing time and to try and make this tutorial manageable. And so our last one here is delete. Okay, maybe put a little comment above that. See what that is. Delete. Okay, let's get into it. Once again, we have a listener here. Okay, on click. We notice that delete data must have been of the type integer. I've created a new integer variable, deleted rows. It takes in just one argument, which is obviously a string argument, okay, which is the ID number, and then from there, it deletes that entry. So delete rows, my database delete. Let's just take a look at what that method looked like inside of there. Okay, SQLite get writable database return, database delete. It takes in the table name, queries by ID, and that string variable. It's going to look for that number, whatever I enter in, and then it's going to be able to delete that. So fairly straightforward. Back to my main activity. I want to make sure I implement in the onCreate that delete. I scroll back to the top slowly. I can put in there delete. Okay, and so from top to bottom, you can see that's all there is to this method. I've declared those UI objects. I've initialized all those functions: create, read, update, delete. Inside of them, they include handlers that access the functions from database helper. And the last one, like I said, is delete. Okay, so let's go back and let's run our application. Save all. Hit the little lightning bolt. Kind of redeploy that. Open up the emulator. Okay, emulator is there now. It's reloading for me. Okay, and we can see that. So now we want to delete an entry. Let's first of all see what we have. We have Bob and Sam. I don't like Sam. I'm going to delete Sam from my database. Hit his ID number 2 that we can see right there. Delete. Entry deleted. Okay, if I now read my data, and now all I have is Bob there. Okay, so just a simple database management system that we've kind of put together here. I can enter in any members that I want. Fred at f at g.com, 5678, his phone number, create, a new entry, data inserted. I hit read. Now I have Fred and Bob, and I have new field or new entries entered into my database as we go. Okay, fairly straightforward. Only things that I worked in here, so I worked in the XML file to create the view. We worked inside the database helper to create all our methods that are going to hold and control. This would be what we call the model to control our database creation and any changes that we have there. And then lastly, we have the controller, which is inside our main activity, and declared all our different UI items, and then have methods that access the stuff from inside database helper. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and see you next time.